Hello and welcome to Fowl Plays, where we look at tales of tabletop tragedy that are sure to ruffle some feathers. I'm your host BossGoose, and today's story features a group of players who ridicule OP for their choice of character, led by a DM who creates a DMPC party leader and puts little to no effort into running the actual module. As he cuts parts that are too much work, complains about the result of his own decisions, and gets passive-aggressive over the simplest of comments. Before we get to that though, you better grab your D20, because while we're debating about which captain we want to hire for our journey, you're suddenly jostled to the side when a young woman bumps into you as she runs by. Taking a second to recover, you notice that the money pouch you keep on your belt has been stolen. We can still see her in the distance, but it's going to be difficult to catch up at this point. With a good athletics check though, we might just be able to stop her, so go ahead and make your roll, and if your last character had the mobile feat, you can go ahead and take that with advantage. And we'll see those results in 3, 2, 1, and if you rolled 15 or higher, then great work. You were able to close the distance and stop that thief in her tracks. And in exchange for not turning her over to the guards, she returns all of the stolen money. On the other hand though, if you rolled 14 or below, then we were unable to catch her before she reunited with her gang, who ambushes us. The situation is looking risky, but their leader offers us a deal. In exchange for hitting his magical subscribe button, not only will they let us walk free cash in hand, but you'll also receive updates whenever new content is available on my channel and easy access to dozens of existing videos to keep you entertained for hours. Now, without any further delays, it's time to take your seats and wet your beaks as we dive on into today's tale. Today's story is titled, Lazy Furry DM Spoils Icewind Dale, Part 1, Farts, Boredom, and Avalanches. I've been holding this in for a while now, but I really just need to get it off my chest. Recently, I had one of the worst D&D campaigns I've ever had. So bad, I just up and left in the middle of my second session. It's got all the classics, a toxic group, a rude and lazy DM, and a plain lack of organization all coming together to make an experience that might have otherwise been tolerable, downright unbearable. I was temporarily off work due to the 2020 shutdowns, and I was looking for something to kill the time. I went on Roll20 and found a group for Rime of the Frost Maiden, right when the module came out. They'd recently lost a member for some reason, and were looking to find a new player, as they were a few levels in. Excited to dive into something new, I put in an application. To my excitement, the DM messages me right away and asks me to cook up a character with a backstory with plenty of hooks. My character was a human nobleman Pact of the Blade warlock, the ambitious youngest son of a wealthy noble family. He was constantly looked down on by his stronger, older brothers. Knowing he'd never surpass their skills as warriors on his own, he started turning to mystical sources looking for an edge. He ended up falling in with an elite dueling club with religious undertones, promising him untold power if he would dedicate himself to their inner mysteries. Young and foolish, he got in deeper and deeper with the cult until he ended up being coerced into pledging his soul to their god. Surprise, it turned out the being they worshipped was actually a devil, looking to corrupt members of the nobility into the service of the Nine Hells. Luckily for him, he's smart enough to get an escape clause written into the contract. If he would pull off a service for the devil, he'd be free from his obligation to it. The devil, having no intention of letting him go and wanting to make an example of him to the other souls he'd conned, tasked him with retrieving a long-lost artifact located somewhere in Icewind Dale. Despite being an obvious suicide mission, my warlock set himself to the task and traveled north. Not the most original backstory, but I figured it had enough plot hooks in it to make it juicy. The favor for my patron could easily have been tied to whatever dungeons were in the Dale. And there was potential for enemies in the form of other cultists looking to get out of the deal, or bounty hunters sent by my family to take me home. Lots of fun stuff that could be brought to a sandbox campaign. He seemed sold on the idea and agreed I'd be arriving in Icewind Dale on a ship and waiting for word from my patron for the next steps in repaying my debt. The town would be the next stop the party would be visiting on their journey, so I'd be able to bump into them and get started. I show up for the first session, eager to see how my character's story gets weaved into the narrative. Too bad absolutely none of my work ended up being used. First session starts. Two things happen right off the bat that set me on edge. I find out the party's de facto leader is a DMPC, who just so happens to have the DM's name and be his avatar image. This is the sort of thing most stories on this subreddit are made out of, but the game literally just started and I had nothing better to do, so I told myself I was being judgmental and decided to give him a chance. I'd seen DMPCs done well before. Since I'm posting this story here, you can tell this was not a well done DMPC, but we'll get to that. Second thing that sets me on edge, everyone in the group is a furry. Now, I have absolutely nothing against any group of people, but the culture of the group had me put off almost immediately. As I describe my character walking into the inn the party was at, someone immediately interrupts me.
Why is he human?
I'm sorry, what?
Why is he human? This is D&D, dude. You can be literally anything you want, and the best you could come up with is a human?
I'm meeting the group for the first time, and the first thing they're doing is insult me for my character choice. I bite my tongue and explain the character I'm playing is a nobleman from a human city in the Forgotten Realms. For him to be some sort of anthro dogman would make absolutely no sense. Anyway, I'm branded the token human of the group. Already feeling more than a little bit like an outsider and the butt of the joke, I go ahead and make my in-character introduction, offering my service as an extra blade during a Yeti hunt. I'm told I can't come with them yet. Wait, why? From my verbal description of them, the group decides that the clothes I've described don't sound warm enough for Icewind Dale. The DMPC agrees, and since he's the group leader, that's that. Apparently, my nobleman was too stupid and poor to have packed proper clothes for the Arctic before taking a several week-long trip to get there. Okay, how much money? Let's just trade up and we can go. Oh no, the whole party wants to come and get their own things, so the DM RPs the store owner for an obnoxiously long amount of time. So we end up going to the shop, and I'm made to use all my starting cash and agree to do unspecified future favors for the shopkeeper before he finally sells the set I need to me. For a set of leather armor identical in function to what I was already wearing, but made of thicker leathers. And this is after haggling. Nearly an hour into the session, and all I've managed to do is not just go broke, but get into debt to yet another shady guy. Absolutely riveting. No wonder they lost their last player, who they ridiculed multiple times for having raised these complaints and then daring to quit on them. The quest itself is pretty straightforward once we get into it. Go out and kill a Yeti hiding in a cave at the top of a mountain. Except one thing. The DM claims that the book says we're supposed to be joined by a party of NPCs looking to kill the monster too. The DM, who has a very tired and droning sounding voice except when he's aggravated, sounds more and more bored as he's introducing us to these characters. Suddenly he goes quiet, and then asks us all to roll a dexterity check. Okay. A massive avalanche suddenly comes out of nowhere and almost sends us all flying off the mountain. I barely make my save. DMPC, of course, makes his, off screen, but a good portion of the party is already wounded and back at the bottom of the mountain. We're told all the NPCs were caught in the path of the avalanche and killed. I actually get interested again at this point. Wow, was that a part of the new module? These random events that could seriously wound the party? Something that showcases the cruelty and danger of the harsh wilderness? No. While we're all trying to regroup, he lets slip his true reasons, while in general being whiny about how the dice weren't fair to the rest of the party. He got halfway through introducing his NPCs when he decided controlling them on top of doing the upcoming encounter was too complicated and boring, so it just worked better. If they were dead, why not just retcon them away? Same reason I had to roleplay getting scammed by a shopkeeper for nearly half an hour. He was dedicated to realism. The lazy bastard almost TPK'd us because he didn't want to have to do the extra work of controlling additional characters, and then whined about luck when he failed to consider if his ass-pull of a solution was something the party could survive. The actual Yeti fight was pretty straightforward. There were 5 of us, and there were only 2 monsters. Apparently, that's an okay number for him to be bothered with playing, other than his brave, handsome, muscle-bound were-polar bear. We ended the session not long after that, but a few miscellaneous gems happened, particularly close to the end. He was pretty passive-aggressive with me for the entire session after the avalanche. We'd found the Yeti's cave, and the Tabaxi Ranger wanted to do some investigation to see if she could find this thing and have us sneak up on it. DM goes quiet, and then asks for her to roll. She rolls high.
Okay, you find something.
What do I find?
Traces of the Yeti.
Yeah? What kind of trace? Where is it?
Well, it's the kind of trace you could hear it or you could smell it,
is the utterly baffling reply. It's clear he just doesn't want to tell us where he's hidden the monster in this cave so it can jump us. I decide to break the awkward tension with a joke. Is it a fart? Everyone got a good laugh except our glorious anthropolar bear leader. For the rest of the session, whenever he hears a stray noise over my mic while someone else is talking, he angrily stops everything to call me out for cutting people off, making me apologize before we can continue. Him and his buddies making fun of me for being token human is fine, but a single joke at his expense and nuclear war is declared. He seems to sense our displeasure with the cop-out of the avalanche because on the way down the mountain, he lets us check where the bodies fell. Miraculously, they were fine. Or at least they were alive enough we could take them all back to town with us on the back of the Tabaxi's pet bison, Appa. Yeah. So, by the end, it's pretty clear to me why they were having trouble keeping players. I felt a bit bummed for having wasted my time, but was also morbidly curious where we'd go from here. I was also curious why the other party members tolerated him, so I decided to come back for the next session to see what happened later when we had some more chances to interact outside a mini dungeon crawl. Maybe because he tolerated their more unusual moments? That, coupled with his trend of being actually so lazy he doesn't even bother to try to be subtle or tell a story, both worsened heavily during the second session and is actually why I quit the campaign, but that's for another time. You know, I never really understood the disdain some people have for human characters. I know it's a fantasy game and there are plenty of options to choose from, but what makes a character interesting and fun is how they're brought to life through their background in RP, not whether they have scales or horns or whatever. And I thought OP put a decent amount of work into their background, and it was a pretty solid setup for future storylines. Not that that ended up mattering in the end. The rest of the group was all furries, so maybe that's why they were giving him a bit of a hard time about playing a human, but it's hard to say based on the context of what the story provides. Because a lot of the focus was on the DM, and for good reason. So, a DMPC party leader is a big red flag in most cases. I've experienced games where a DMPC has joined my group temporarily and it's worked out well a few times, but when you make one the leader of the group, it's more often than not a self-insert power fantasy. This character wasn't mentioned much in this part of the story, so we'll have to see what develops in the next part, but considering the shared name and avatar with the DM, I doubt I'm far off the mark. The real meat of this story was the DM's general attitude towards running the game. Now, if you're going off a module, it's obviously okay to add your own spin on things or events, and naturally, you can cut stuff that may be unnecessary too. That's the beauty of tabletop RPGs. Unfortunately, the way DM went about it was pretty half-assed. If you don't want a bunch of NPCs traveling with the group, then leave them out altogether, or introduce them another way if they're important to the story. Getting halfway through introductions and then deciding it's too much of a bother and dropping an avalanche on everyone is not the best solution. Especially if you're going to end up getting upset at the results when half the players roll poorly and end up getting hurt. We saw this same kind of wishy-washy thing with the Ranger's survival check. If you don't want to give that information out, come up with a reason why. Like, the fresh snow from the avalanche has removed any traces near the cave entrance, so you're unable to discern if the Yetis are inside. That way the players can understand why they're not getting this information, rather than having them roll, them getting a good result, and then you struggling to come up with some kind of useless half answer. While we're on the subject of that check, on top of the DM being lazy, he seemed pretty petty as well based on his reaction to OP's simple joke about a fart. Retaliating by grinding things to a halt whenever OP bumped their mic and demanding apologies for interrupting others, which is pretty ironic by the way, really gives me a better idea of what kind of guy in general DM was. Overall, it really seemed like DM was the sort to not put any extra effort or thought into running the game and was just hoping to do a more paint by numbers sort of situation. At least, that's the impression I got from the story, but I suppose we'll see what develops in part 2. Anyways, thanks for checking out my video and sticking around till the end. I upload new content every Tuesday and Friday, so make sure you check out my channel for more D&D stories. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a goosebump in the comments below. Your feedback and support is greatly appreciated. But until next time, be good players.